Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today is March the 1st, 2021. A year ago, this day, all parties were preparing for the March 2nd elections. Little did we know then it would take us 5 months to have the genuine results of those elections declared. Tomorrow will mark a year since those elections were held. Mr. Speaker, we have been regaled by the APNU with all sorts of small stuff. But the issue is that what the PNC AFC has to live with for the rest of its existence is a legacy that left our country, a legacy of a party that was willing to do anything and everything to stay in power, regardless of the will of the people of our country. They can talk about all sorts of small stuff. Some may have merit in terms of mistakes we made in the past or weaknesses we had. But not any government, even Burnham's government, went to the extent to which the APNU, PNC, AFC went in 2020. None. And in fact, the legacy of the left us is not just Guyana. The legacy they have left us as the people of Guyana is a legacy that is known across the world now. We're the only country in the whole world, in the democratic world, that had to wait 5 months and struggle day by day for 5 months to be able to have the will of the people respected and declared. I mean, I'll just go back a bit because some people are a bit younger than I am. But I lived through the 70s when we as a people had to live with the fact, Mr. Speaker, and you were in my generation, I believe, that Jonestown, 900 people were massacred on our soil. And it was the highest civilian massacre in the world, in a non-war situation in the world, until September 11th, the plane going into the Twin Towers. That was our legacy. Is this the legacy always that when the PNC is in power, we have to live with these global legacies that stain us as a people? How often we've had to say when we go abroad, Guyana, they say, Jonestown. Now they will say Guyana, country in which y'all had to wait for 5 months. Mr. Speaker, and they come to us with crocodile tears in this parliament about their righteousness, and it is galling because whatever they did, right or wrong, good or bad, it has been overtaken and stained forever. What they did from the December 21st, 2018 no confidence motion right through to August the 2nd, 2020. It is not only the 5 months. We were dragged before the courts to be told arithmetically what we all knew, that 33 is the majority of 65. How disgraceful. And yet they don't hang their heads in shame. They come here and pretend to be righteous. They have come here with jaundiced eyes. Their eyes are jaundiced because everything they see in is race. They cannot look at our nation and the kaleidoscope of our nation and how beautiful we are in our distinct differences, culturally, ethnically, religiously, geographically. They come here with jaundiced eyes and deduce everything. The common denominator is race. And how can you have a country being run by a party like that? That's why they failed. That's why they're on the other side. They did not comprehend that as Guyanese, we're many different colors and combinations. And we have our differences and we have our ethnic insecurities, but we still love our country. We still want to be here. We still want to make this our home. And they did not understand that Afro-Guyanese, Indo-Guyanese, mixed Guyanese, Portuguese Guyanese, Chinese Guyanese, Amerindian want this as their home. They didn't want to live in this situation where they discriminated against people based on color, sometimes religion, and the political affiliation. And yet they come here and talk a whole set of nonsense. Mr. Speaker, you know the problem. Remember, you and I have been in Parliament for a while, and we know the old bat and ball trick. Every time the PNC, whether it was 92 to 97, 97 to 2001, 2001 to 2006, 2006, 2011, 2012 to 2015, bad players. Every time they were losing a discussion, throw down your bat and ball and walk. Poor losers. That is in your DNA, you're poor losers. You try to hijack an election, thwart the will of the people of this country who voted on election day in a peaceful elections and gave their mandate to the People's Progressive Party Civic. And the goal of it all is that despite the results, you did everything, every day from March the 5th right to August 2nd to make sure that you remained in power regardless of the will of the people. But the point is, Mr. Speaker, democracy prevails. This new nascent democracy of ours that started in 1992 with the first free and fair elections, it's a baby democracy. We don't have 300 years of democracy after us like the Americans. We don't have hundreds of years of democracy after us like the British. But what we do have is our guts to recognize how we had to fight for this democracy. And we've had to fight for it again to protect it and preserve it in that period between December 2018 and August 2020. Democracy is now enshrined, and it is something that every citizen of this country recognizes. It's their duty to protect and defend, every citizen. But you know, Mr. Speaker, in the whole thing we've been listening to for the last 4 days, there's no mea culpa. There's no mea culpa. There's no responsibility for anything they did. They blame everything on somebody else. As a government and a former government, they take responsibility for nothing. And that is sad. I mean, it doesn't bother me because I know that won't help them to win elections again. But they did, we in the PPP said, we recognized some of our weaknesses and that we would correct them. And we did. And we came back stronger and more united than ever before. And the people recognize that. Mr. Speaker, I want to deal with an illusion that exists in this Parliament. There's an illusion that there's something called the APNU-AFC coalition. The problem, Mr. Speaker, it no longer exists. WPA is gone. The shell of TUF gone, or that never was in the first place. The Guyana Action Party never was, but it was part of the 2011. Coalition for Transformation, which Annette Ferguson headed, is gone. It was a PNC front in the first place. Justice for All, gone. Scott's party, which I can never remember the name, please forgive me, I can't remember the name of the party, made up of 3 people, gone. What are we left with? The bare bones. The bare bones goes back to the DNA of the PNC. The PNC and AFC. And both are shells of their former days. So there's no APNU coalition in this house. What you have is a PNC-AFC marriage. That's what you have. You know, a marriage of convenience, who knows? But a marriage. Mr. Speaker, this PNC-AFC coalition crossed the Rubicon. You know, when Caesar crossed the Rubicon, he never returned, never crossed back. He was defeated. It is a passage to no return. And so when the PNC crossed the Rubicon, when they refused to comply with the Constitution and the no confidence motion and call elections by March 21st, 2019, they were on the path to destruction and defeat. And so said, so done. Mr. Speaker, the oppression of the PNC, AFC in government, 200 taxes, promises not delivered in the 5 years, promises they'd made in the first 100 days. The public servants were to get 20% increase in salary. Never happened. They fooled the public service union and the teachers union who backed them in the 2015 elections that manna was going to fall from heaven. They were going to get 20%. Well, they never did. And the teachers had to go and strike in November 2017 to try to get what little bit they got out of the government. But then it was broken promises to all, including to the poor and vulnerable, who they'd promised that they would have all these increases in the allowances, in the old age pension, etc. What did they deliver? What did they deliver? An increase in tax collection of 225 billion as a result of the new taxes, fees and licenses going up. And as my colleague Utah said, the policies of the coalition were politically, socially, and economic extractive. Extractive. Perfect description. Meaning, for me, in my interpretation of my colleague's words, is that you took all that you could. You sucked the country of its oxygen. People were suffocating under your leadership, and you never recognized it. You never saw it. You refused to believe it. Mr. Speaker, fundamentally, there is a philosophical difference between the PPPC and the PNC-AFC. And fundamentally, it is a governance issue. What is the governance issue? How is power acquired, and on whose behalf is it used? Who are the beneficiaries? That's what governance is about. On whose behalf are you ruling? Who are the beneficiaries? You're judged by your governance structures and your philosophy. Or, as the AFC was doing, they were governing for the few at the top, for the elite and their friends and their cronies, and many of the long-time supporters of the PNC who felt it was Awidi's time. We first time. It's time to get back. Do you remember those things? The issue of the people and the government is a contract that is sacred. It is fundamental, and it is based on our Constitution. There are other philosophical differences between us. We have a pro-poor, pro-growth approach to development, and that's what we have started with in '92, and we've continued right to now. It is always, when you look at the PPPC budgets, there's a large section to do with pro-poor, and a large section to do with pro-growth in order to expand the economy, to allow for the growth of businesses and for the betterment of all of our people. And what is the PNC-AFC philosophy? Their philosophy to development is tax-driven. Tax the people, let them pay more, rather than investment, expansion, diversification. And so, fundamentally, their philosophy is anti-people. It is anti-people and anti-growth. Their economic model is one that used taxation as a means to create revenue. In fact, in 2018, as Raman McRae in his annual budget focus said, government being in the business of profit as a means unto itself. This is his comment on the 2018 budget. But governments philosophically are not in the business of profit. Governments are enablers and facilitators. And that's what the PPC is now. We are the enablers and the facilitators to make sure that our people are able to reach the heights that they're supposed to have, to get the opportunities to do that, to get the support of the government and whatever goods and services we offer in order to be able to reach that. They talked about inclusion and social cohesion until everybody wanted to barf when they heard those words, because it was so disconnected to reality. Inclusion? Where was that? They talk about firing people. They fired thousands of people. And so I'll come back to that. But they fired thousands of people. In the public service, they fired over 2,000 people. They fired 1,972 Amerindian community service officers. The ethnic group that had the largest persons who were dismissed within the first month of the PNC coming to power. Why was there vengeance against the Amerindians? Inexplicable. Because they chose to vote a particular way that they didn't agree with? But Mr. Speaker, there are other crimes and there are other philosophies. You were invisible. You were inaccessible. You were divorced from the people, relying on expensive spin doctors, both in Guyana and beyond, to churn out race and division, to churn out fake news, and to weave a narrative that fooled yourselves. You actually fooled yourselves. But no one else was fooled. You claimed achievements which no one could find. You claimed gifts that weren't existing. You made people who were not politically and ethnically correct feel like second-class citizens in our own country of birth. You made us feel as if we were second-class citizens in the nation of our birth, where our navel string is buried, and you come here and preach righteousness, and that you are so holier than thou. We were all made to feel that we were not worthy of being in Guyana. You treated us as second-class citizens. You took away the hope of people in the future. You undermined trust and confidence. People didn't know how they were going to make it. Not only the 7,000 sugar workers lost their job and the 1,972 Amrina Community Service officers, nor the 2,000 odd public servants, but there were also 30,000 jobs were lost because of the wrong policies and priorities of your government. And yet, you remained oblivious and insensitive to this all. This is your shame. This is your legacy. We don't have to defend you. You have to apologize to the people for what you did to them. You saw our cultural, as I said, ethnic, religious diversity and linguistic diversity was something that was and still is being used by you, by the APNU, PNCFC, to divide instead of to reconcile and build. You were vindictive and heartless, and you still are being vindictive and heartless. Let's, Mr. Speaker, let's do some maths, because I know the APNU, AFC, PNC are not good at maths. They don't seem to like maths very much. But let's do some translation. Let's do some translation. And let me confess, I'm not very good at maths either, but I do know arithmetic. So let's go back. The 1,972 Amerindian Community Service officers who were terminated, they had 10,000 dependents, which meant by the salary being withdrawn from them from August 2015, $700 million was removed from the village economies in the interior. This increased poverty. This increased the poverty exponentially in these areas. But what did you give back in return? Did it bother you? You gave back boats, buses, bicycles, expandable sandals, buses that broke down after a few mornings, boats that didn't work. And a very small percentage of people. You gave these tokens, like when white man came to our countries as colonizers, they gave tokens to the natives. You gave tokens to the natives in our country. You gave tokens to the Amerindian people of our country. Here's a couple bus, here's a couple boats. Be grateful. It is APNU, PNC, PPP, APNU, PNC, AFC in government. Shockingly, $700 million removed from the economy. That is why the Amerindian villages were having trouble, including not dealing with the community development plans. That money they had applied for before 2015 was approved in the Norway Agreement, and yet you didn't release that money. You released that money in little tranches as if it was when you wanted a little photograph in the newspapers and get notoriety. But you didn't get it. You just didn't get it. People were suffering as a result of one decision you took, and that you didn't get it. You treated 7,000 sugar workers as collateral damage. And in this house, even more recently, the whole sugar industry was called bloodsuckers of the nation. But yet, those 7,000 workers had families. And if an average of 5 persons in a sugar worker's home, 35,000 people were immediately impacted by this. The impact on the wider community, it has been calculated to be 1/4 of the Guyanese population was affected. And yet, you did nothing. Nothing. You were asked to give relief to the sugar workers who lost their jobs, and you did nothing. You just didn't get it. You just didn't get it. 30,000 people lost their jobs. Why? Your taxation, all the other wrong priorities you had. Business closed down. People were, and this is before COVID. This is before COVID. And yet, you come here to this house and talk about bauxite. When what happened to bauxite is your fault. You did it. And yet, you're so delusional that you don't even recognize when you were in government. But 30,000 people lost their jobs. No help, no assistance, no relief. You just didn't get it. Every week in the official gazette was full of bank sales of motorbikes, minibuses, houses, farming equipment, combines, because the people couldn't pay their loans. And still, you didn't get it. You didn't get it. You continue to accumulate. You continue to accumulate. The PNC, AFC continue to accumulate land. You had this land grabbing going on. And all sorts of other nefarious arrangements which are under investigation now. Mr. Speaker, in 2018, the Ministry of Health boasted it had the biggest budget. In fact, in the 5 years, Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Health had over $105 billion. Yet, severe and constant shortages of essential drugs and medical supplies were across the country. Immunization fell because of lack of vaccines. Drugs for HIV/AIDS patients were unavailable. People had to go and buy if they had the money. And in many parts of the country, there's no place like a pharmacy to go buy anything. And yet, the monies were spent. $100 billion spent. And all your legacy you seem to talk about is Lillian Dow. How disgraceful. It wasn't even government property that you spent over $1 billion on. Of taxpayers' money, by the way, not yours. You didn't get it. You just didn't get it. You were living so far in the clouds and thought that you were entitled, that you had transport to government, that you didn't have to worry about the minions below you, the working people, the farmers. You didn't have to pay attention to them. Taxes, the taxes that were brought in. It is calculated that approximately over $200,000 per annum was removed from every household in Guyana by the taxes you introduced. And you didn't get it. You didn't get it. 60% increase in the taxes between 2015 and 2019. $225 billion was taken from our people. And you wonder why people are having a hard time. You wonder why. And I don't think you wondered why. I don't think you cared to wonder why anything. But you didn't recognize that by the taxation you brought in and the consequences, if you tax farming implements, you will then have an increase in the cost of production. You will have then a cost of the products reaching the market. When you didn't remove the fuel cost, until when the thing had dropped so far down, you were exposed. It caused increase in food costs. And in the 2018 midterm review, the Minister of Finance, Mr. Jordan, had to admit that the inflation had gone up because of the cost of living and the cost of production. Mr. Speaker, but if that were all, Mr. Speaker, if that were all, but there's more and there's more. It's like opening a Pandora's box, and out pumps all these issues, and the more you dig, the more you find. Mr. Speaker, the levels of corruption, transparency, issues of transparency and accountability were levels never seen in this country before.
We will have to withdraw corruption, right?
Scandals, Mr. Speaker, scandals. Scandals and scandamania. Scandamania in its heights in the 5 years, in the heights. Mr. Speaker, I'm not talking anecdotally. I'm not talking anecdotally. Go to the Auditor General's report. 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019. You will barf. You will barf when you read almost every single page. There's a scandal or inexplicable use of money. So, Mr. Speaker, while I'm not allowed to use the word corruption, you will have to find another word for corruption because it begins with a capital CORRUPTION.
Honourable Minister, please.
Mr. Speaker, the levels were so high of scandals that people, I'm just asking how to spell it, it's that it denied. You see, the issue of not only people filling their pockets and using taxpayers' money wrongly, it's what the impact was on the people. So by these scandals, people were denied better health care because of the $100 billion in health, of which the majority on the drug budget went through non-procurement, non-public tender arrangements. So, but yet the drugs weren't there. So people suffered. This cost, these scandals cost the ordinary people every single day of their lives. You took money out of their pockets and then you didn't give them back what they needed. Look, let's go to housing. You didn't like our housing program. You threw it out the window. You created duplexes after quite a while, and there are, again, questions and scandals in relation to that. But you never changed the law so that people could borrow money from the bank in order to buy a duplex. This is what you have short horizons. But you didn't recognize that. Infrastructure. For every time you didn't do a road, a bridge, you cost. You cost the bus people, the taxi people, the cars, because those had to be repaired more often. You then remove the tires coming in, the used tires, and therefore taxi men had to pay from $6,000 for a tire to $18,000 to a tire. Where do you think that money was coming from for ordinary people? It's coming out of making decisions. Mr. Speaker, some of you men, some of the men in this house over there, not all, but some of the men, I try to be careful, never go into a market or a supermarket. They have other people do that for you. However, Mr. Speaker, it was sad to see as you went through the 5 years, people started buying less and less. Less chicken, less fish, more rice, more chow mein. They made decisions with what money they had available. And you must have known this. And yet you were oblivious. Look at your misuse of funds to do with infrastructure cost everybody who was transporting money because you had to pay more to get to where you had to go. You cost the country in jobs. By having the housing program become whittled down to almost 2,000 a year, that much, it meant that 5,000 workers in construction in the housing sector lost their jobs. Manufacturers who were producing goods for the construction industry were losing markets as well. You also decided that, the tender processes are something you could, dispense with. And so what you did, you had contractors of this country unable to get work for 5 years, whether they were of a particular composition or how they look or how you thought they looked. 5 years, contractors, thousands of contractors couldn't get work in this country. And now that we've gone back, public tender, opening, it's in the newspapers, it's all over the place. We have an upsurge in the tendering and the companies coming forward, small, medium, and large, to tender for government works. And you know what that will do? You know what that will do? It'll create jobs. Because as more work is created, you hire more people. But you're so myopic, so short-sighted, that you didn't recognize that there are these ripple effects. Ripple effects. And then we have the other areas, what is called sustainable livelihood SLED. I can't remember the other part of it. Sustainable livelihood. The report that came out, a good program, a program that means well. But what did you use it for? You used it to give rewards to the boys, to your activists. And you left out meaningfully deserving people who needed that support was fled. And of course, that is another issue under investigation. Even the COVID relief that you claim that you were involved in, your 50,000 voucher for people to get groceries. Why was it that the center to apply in Georgetown was at the Green Mansion opposite the Cultural Center? Why was it that Guyanese had to go and apply at the Burnham Museum in the greenhouse, where you all know what I'm talking about, opposite the Cultural Center, to apply for the food vouchers? And why is
Honorable
it that only a few
Minister,
people got it?
to continue, you need to apply for an extension.
Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, we request an extension of 5 minutes. Would honourable member to continue?
Thank you, Honorable Prime Minister. Honorable Minister of Governance, you may continue to conclude.
These scandals, Mr. Speaker, denied our people what was rightfully theirs: access to goods and services, access to a better life. And then, of course, you have the non-inclusion of people in the jobs, appointments, access to housing, water, and safety nets. The denial of exclusion for civil society and the parliamentary opposition. Non-inclusion. In fact, what you were and the PNC was exclusionary. Because there's a level of control freakism that we observed in the 5 years, a level of control freakism that if you weren't on their side, you were of no worth, and therefore is to be ignored. I leave my colleague, Anil Nandalal, to talk about the constitution violations, except to say one thing. Another of your legacies is that no other government in this country, from independence to now, has been found to have committed so much violations of the Constitution by the judiciary of Guyana and the Caribbean Court of Justice. No other government. Mr. Speaker, when my colleague Colin Crowell talks about having delivered 10,000 house lots in the last 3 months of 2020, do we realize how many jobs we've created with that? What hope we've created with that? The issue of people owning their house lot is priceless. Priceless in terms of their whole future, how they look at life, how they invest in this country, how they believe this is the place to be. But no, you dwindled it down to 2,000 and didn't even bother to do anything proper with it. Mr. Speaker, as I try to wind down, and there are many things. I've heard about the unions being quoted, but I have the quote from 2018, where the TUC and the FITUC both condemned the 2018 budget as being anti-people and anti-union. Mr. Speaker, since we've got into office, we have had the 2020 emergency budget, and that has set the stage, as we said then, to do emergency works with COVID and regards to our economy. And in 2021, we now commence implementing stage of expanding and diversifying the economy and repairing the damage caused by the APNU AFC's time in office. And we have to do hard work to rebuild our nation. We have to restore hope and trust and confidence in the future. And when you look at the programs that we have in our budget, and I hope some of you read it, because some of the things have been said in the Parliament, clearly nobody read it. But in those few months we've been in office, 5.5 billion and more have been given out in the COVID relief. I just want to make a quick comment. Between March and August, in the COVID, not one mask was given out to the public. Mr. Speaker, as parliamentary opposition, I noticed Mrs. Hughes said we didn't join the task force. We're not joining their task force, Mr. Talkshop. We were doing 200,000 masks made in the midst of COVID by volunteers across in every single region of this country. Food hampers delivered to thousands and thousands of people with no political strings attached. And yet, you want us to be part of the task force? I don't think you really wanted us. But Mr. Speaker, when you look at the budget and the document here and the volumes, and if they've been going through it, where's the focus? health, education, public works, housing and water, human services. And this is where we're talking about, in public works, creating the infrastructure for the expansion of the economy and the diversification economy. Agriculture, in terms of reversing what APNU AFC did by moving us in a monoculture direction with oil and gas only. We're reversing on that. And so the investment in agriculture is not to do with pineapple and bora, as someone was talking about today, but about really moving us in an agro-processing way to be more value-added and also expanded. Mr. Speaker, when you look at health and education, human services, housing and water, those are all in relation to improving the quality of life of our people, regardless of where they live, regardless of what class they are, regardless of what ethnic group they are, regardless of what religion, and regardless of what gender. Mr. Speaker, you, APNU AFC, you were the gods of small things. You were the gods of small things. You worried about arches and painting of buildings. The PPPC from August the 2nd, 2020 is focusing on the big issues, and the priority is to transform the economy by expanding and diversifying the economic base, improving, as I said, the quality of life, and reducing the geographic disparities that exist in our country. We have geographic disparities between the rural and the coastal and the interior. And we have to grapple with that. So, Mr. Speaker, thank you. I'd just like to say that 2021 is a plan for recovery, economic dynamism, and resilience. Did someone give me 5 minutes, by the way? Okay, I wasn't paying attention. And comrades and members of parliament, I suggest when you have your time and you get over all your hype, why don't you read pages 43 to 57 in the budget book?
You're going to have to stop now, Honorable Minister.
And 54 to 64. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.